So I think it's a little bit colder where you are, right?
It is cold today. Yeah, it is quite cold.
So let me tell our audience a little bit about you. So, work in the British Council Madrid. You're a teacher and you're the special educational needs coordinator there, which is your specialist subject and what we talk
Mhm.
about today. So I know that you did a master's in applied linguistics and you specialized in bilingual policy making. And this has helped you in your role in Madrid and doing research on equality and inclusion, specifically in bilingual education programs. So I see that now you're a teacher trainer as well, specifically on inclusion. And well, you're interested in best practices for primary and secondary teachers in bilingual programs and all types of programs in Spain
Mhm.
and the world. So I can see that definitely you've got a lot to tell us today on this interesting topic, project-based learning, which is
Mhm.
something I always like learning more about. Well, welcome, Elsa. I'll be here if you need me, but
Mhm.
I'm going to turn my camera off now. And when you're ready, you can share your slides.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Melissa, for the introduction. And it's really exciting to be here from people from all around the world. I've attended some of these webinars, and I always love the the beginning when everybody says hello from their country. I think it's really exciting to know that we're all interested in the same topic uh, in different parts of the world. So, hello everybody. As Melissa already mentioned, I'm going to be talking about project-based learning and how to make the participation of our learners more inclusive. As I already mentioned in the teaser video that maybe some of you had a chance to watch, this is a topic that I was really interested in personally because of my role, of course, as a student, as a SENCO, as a special educational needs coordinator, but as well as a teacher. When we started implementing project-based learning at the British Council in primary and secondary, and even in adults, quite a few years ago already, I was really excited because I thought, well, this is a really flexible methodology. It's really going to help include those students that needed a less structured approach. It's really gonna allow us to do more scaffolding that we were doing before. And all of this is true. I still think that project-based learning is a great methodology for including diverse needs and preferences. But I realized that despite all of this, there were still some students that couldn't participate to their full extent, couldn't reach their full potential. And I started wondering why, researching, observing them, and trying to put together information from different um, methodologies, from universal design for learning that we'll mention briefly, looking at executive functions of our students that we'll also talk about briefly, and how this a deficit in these might get in the way of participation. And I try to um, implement some of these things in my classes to help my students participate more in different ways. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. Hopefully we'll get through everything that I'm aiming to, which is, of course, very briefly review what inclusion means, understand, try to understand what can get in the way of student participation, and then, of course, we will explore different tools to encourage participation. Okay, let me just, yeah, now there we go. And if we have time, depending on the questions in the chat, we can briefly look at a real project. Of course, depending on your context, this will be more or less relevant, then you'll be able to imagine a real project in your own context. So if we have time, we'll briefly look at it. But what we really need time for is for questions and answers and talk about your own contexts at the end for 10 or 15 minutes. Okay, so what do you think inclusion is in an ESL classroom or in a bilingual subject classroom? I'm sure that if you're here, it's because you already have an idea. But let's see what your definition is. Could you please put it in the chat? And let's see if we come up with similar, different, or complementary definitions. Okay, loads of them right away. Letting everybody participate equally. When all students are active and involved, equal chance of learning. Oh, it's a lifestyle even. Equal opportunities, yes, to involve, getting all involved. Yeah, it's a lot about, yeah. Okay, yes, irrespective of disability, gender, race, color, that's right. Okay, so all of these definitions are valid. And I think that in the end, what we have to think is that we need to go beyond just the physical integration of students in the classroom, right? It's about welcoming diversity. It's not just about having students there, right? And making this diversity a rich learning resource. So bearing this definition in mind, right, that it's about taking advantage of that diversity and welcoming it and even using it as a learning resource, what can get in the way of participation if we are, or we think that we are making our best and trying to make sure that all of our students can participate? So any ideas? I'm sure we'll come up with very similar ones. That can get in the way of participation in general, not just in project-based learning. Fear, constraint, time constraint, class size, physical obstacles, of course. Yeah, there can be loads of barriers: learning, language, emotional, no motivation, prejudices, lack of interest, right? No motivation, lack of interest, yeah. Language barriers, exactly, yeah. Lack of confidence, okay. Lack of planning from the teacher or from the student. Okay, yeah. So actually, you've mentioned a lot of the things that I was going to say because I'm sure it's based on our classroom experience. So one of the main ones is, of course, lack of motivation, right? I'm sure you can agree with me. Then a lot of our students will either feel insecure about their level or for other reasons. And very related to this, they can also be scared of giving the wrong answer. This is very common in my teaching context because the this in the school setting, it's very common to well, I wouldn't say to punish anymore, right? But there is a lot of wrong and right answer, and students can be very scared, can come to our classes being very scared of giving the wrong answer. Then, of course, it might just be that the student doesn't know the answer because the content is way beyond what their current knowledge is, way beyond their zone of proximal development, or maybe they think it is because they haven't understood the question, or the question might be too broad. So the students just can't even begin to imagine how to get there, or they don't even know what the steps are to answer that question, right? And then, of course, we might have students with various uh, specific or additional educational needs with a disability, and related to this, what we will see very briefly today, they might have a deficit in their executive functions that's having an impact in their performance. So this is what can get in the way of participation in general. Okay, I'm not talking really about physical barriers because, as I said, I think we should even just take that for granted, right? We're going to talk about even more than making sure there's a ramp for students. That should be the case everywhere, right? To access the classroom and that kind of thing. So we're going to try and go beyond that. So if we think in particular about project-based learning, you can either put your answers in the chat or just think about it now. You don't need to share your answers if you want now. You just think about what can be different in these areas that can get in the way of student participation in project-based learning. Can some of these actually be diminished or augmented? I would say, for example, that lack of motivation is probably not such a problem with project-based learning because it's a methodology in which um, we have to make sure as teachers that we're working on something meaningful, something that is related to real life, right? So there is a real life outcome. They're working on skills that are transferable. They're not very specific to one subject. So in general, this motivates students a lot more than when they can't really see the big picture or the utility of what they're doing. But it can still be the case that some students might not be motivated, sometimes because of the other reasons, right? Because they're insecure, so they become discouraged, because they don't understand, so they are not motivated, or just because they don't like the topic for different reasons. So, I think that regarding insecurity and fear of giving the wrong answer, we could see two different things here. We'll probably see students that feel more insecure because there are loads more opportunities for speaking in project-based learning. But at the same time, um, as I said before, it's a methodology in which it's not so much about giving the right answer, but about high order thinking skills, about speculating, about discovering. So there should probably be, at least when students get used to working this way, there should be less fear of giving the wrong answer. Um, when it comes to the zone of proximal development, not knowing the answer, I think that in this case, students actually will have to hold a lot more information in their minds because we might be teaching a subject in English, or we might be teaching English but focused around a topic. So there's the language, there's the content itself or the specific vocabulary, then there's all the process language that they need to use to interact. So it's a lot of things for students to hold in their minds in order to be able to participate, right? So this is where we are going to have to make sure that we're supporting and scaffolding in ways that we will see very soon. And then, of course, the task being too broad or question not understood, I think can happen a bit more often as well in project-based learning because it's a less structured methodology than other more formal settings in which we know we get to the class, the teacher explains something, we do a few exercises, we correct them, and we go home, right? So uh, students might sometimes not be able to might not be able to understand um, where we're leading to, or they might have forgotten, or because of a language barrier, right? They might understand the final objective, but not the steps in between. So there are a lot of things that teachers can do there as well to make sure that the question is understood, that it's not too broad. And well, you're probably already thinking about breaking down, right, tasks and instruction giving, and those tips that we have heard about very often. When it comes to executive functions and special needs and disability, we might see that some students have communication difficulties, and this can be very evident in project-based learning because there are a lot of opportunities for exchanges. There's group work, there's pair work, there can be presentations more often than in other settings. So some students might have communication issues, and they might also have deficits in their executive functions. I'm quite sure that they will mention something around this when they speak about neurodiversity later on. So I'm just going to briefly mention why these executive functions are really important. We're talking about cognitive abilities such as flexibility to change tasks, for example, or to change where we were going, working memory, which is very important as well. As I just mentioned, in project-based learning, we will have a lot of things to hold in our minds in order to, and they're different every day, right? Because it's not the same kind of setting every day, not the same kind of instructions every day. So a lot of things for students to hold in their memory, and in inhibitory control, the ability to control our impulses to succeed, to get where we want to go, to avoid distractions, to keep ourselves motivated. So, all of these abilities are the ones that are going to really help us in our day to day life. And of course, in the classroom to do all these things listed here: initiate, plan, and organize something, right? So, something essential in this methodology: set goals, long term goals, solve problems, and change solutions when one is not working, tasks, switching between tasks. That's something we're going to have to do a lot when working on a project, and then regulate our emotions, our behavior, monitor how are we doing? Are we doing well? Do I need to change something in my behavior to succeed? Can I what do I need to remember to keep myself motivated? Okay, so all of these things are areas in which some of our students can have a deficit of, especially students with ADHD, but as well students with dyslexia, dysgraphia, students on the autism spectrum. Okay, so it's really important because uh, it's going to help us do basic things in our life and when we are learning as well. So they can have a great impact in participation, and we'll see now how to compensate some of those deficits. But focusing on participation for one more minute and opportunities that we might find during project-based learning, I'd like you to think for a second which are some typical opportunities in the most common structures for a project, and whether your students find it easier or more difficult to participate in projects. And as teachers, when do we tend to assess these students? In which of these participation opportunities? So if you want, you can answer one, two, or the three of them. You can just write a number and your answer in the chat so that we know which one you're answering to. Okay, when do we tend to assess? Which are some typical opportunities for participation in project-based learning? And do our students find it easier or more difficult to participate than in more structured settings? hmm Creating something together, collaborative work, exactly. Yeah, presentation, of course. Brainstorming is another stage. Producing, yeah, okay, it's presentation, group work, yeah. Haha. Joe Carr, we tend to assess output, but we should assess all the way along. That's what I was getting to. Okay, yeah. So I think we all have a very clear idea of what the typical stages are in a project, right? So we would have, depending, but sometimes input, or maybe students themselves do a bit of research, and we practice something at the beginning, right, to have a little bit of knowledge and help us move on. Then they're going to be planning individually, sometimes in pairs, in groups, depending. Then there will definitely be some group work at some stage, whether it's big or small groups. And there comes presenting, right? Which is something that some students find really difficult. When some are presenting, then there's also opportunities for participation, because other students are going to be listening to presentations. So we should never forget that they can be giving a task, and they can be writing something, which is also a chance for us to see if they have acquired knowledge, or for them to put into practice some of the knowledge while listening. They can then, of course, give feedback to these presentations, and we as teachers need to make sure that we give feedback to the presentations or to the whole process. And this is also a chance for students to talk to us directly, one to one, or to talk to each other, give feedback to each other. And it should never be neglected as an opportunity to participate. So, as somebody already said, we should assess all along the process. So, today, I think one of the things is that we are going to talk about, and what we're going to focus on, is on making sure that we help our students participate. But I think a key message is as well that as teachers, we should make sure that we're paying attention to their participation all along the process, right? Because um, there are loads of opportunities, written, speaking, even using their bodies. So in which they're going to show us what they know, they're going to express themselves. So we should take all of those into account as the first step, I think. So all this great variety and flexibility that we get when we work with projects means, if we look at the Universal Design for Learning guidelines, means that we can provide our students with a lot of different ways of engaging and choosing what motivates each of them, right? So that's already a way of making sure that we get rid of that possible barrier of motivation. We can also, it's very easy for us to make sure that there's varied ways of accessing materials and sources of information, varied formats as well. Obviously, if our students have a visual or hearing impairments, it will be much easier than if we're using a book to provide them with another source of information so that they can do their work as well. But some students, not because of a physical impairment, because of a special need, might also benefit from a certain format. And it's easier as well in this kind of work to make sure that we give them the variety they need in that sense. And then, of course, uh, it's also possible to allow students to express and communicate their outcomes in different ways. It doesn't always have to be an open class presentation. Some students will love it. Some students might struggle during these. Somebody mentioned in another time I did a session similar to this one, was the art gallery presentation pattern, in which a person from each group stayed with the project, and then the rest of the students went around the classroom, and they heard the presentations of those people, but it was always in small little groups, no? So they rotated from group to group, and one of two people presented, and then they switch roles. That's a great way of doing it as well. Groups are much smaller and they have to do it over and over again. So there are also opportunities for us to give feedback in between and for them to improve right there. No, not they don't have to wait until the next project. They can implement their feedback in the same day. So there are different ways to think about um, knocking down those barriers that are preventing our students from participating. But I think that an efficient way of thinking about them is looking at motivation, accessing information, and expressing those outcomes. So that way, we'll just talk about these three areas and it will be a little bit easier to visualize. So, regarding motivation, the good news is that there's a lot of things that teachers can do, right? And very often, what students' motivation are very related to the practices that we put in place in our classes, in our classrooms. So, of course, we know that one of the ways of getting our students on board it's by arousing curiosity and attention. And this should be very easy with project-based learning, right? Because we're generally talking about real life situations. And in the same sense, it should be very easy as well to state a communicative utility because these projects are related to real life. So we just need to remember to let them know why we're doing something and what's going to be the use for them in another subject in the future, what they're going to be able to do when they succeed to learn what we're learning. Then, of course, somebody mentioned already in the chat that um, we're working in groups, in pairs, and that in itself is really motivating, right? Competition, we can introduce that. Even if it's a project that we're talking about, there can be different stages, input stages, for example, during which we can have a competition. Something that we will very easily be able to do here is to make sure that the products are tangible in some way, right? Not not tangible as in always produce a piece of writing, right? But something more lifelike and that students can really picture even before they do it themselves, right? So we have to think as well about modeling, bringing in a model, showing them what it's going to look like, and that's really going to motivate them because they're going to be able to imagine and project what they're doing while they're doing it. So these kind of strategies have actually uh, proven to be successful in supporting students uh, from disadvantaged socioeconomic backgrounds. So of course, they can help students with other types of deficits as well. And I think that something else that we need to remember in any kind of teaching, um, so in projects, when we're doing projects as well, is just to wrap it up nicely, right? So, whatever it is we're doing, even if we think, okay, the topic today is just not something that these students are interested in, I'm not interested in it very much as a teacher. So, let's just market it well for them. So, something that always works is to do a part of the project using mini whiteboards. They'll write anything that you want on them for ages. Sometimes even for the activity can go on for a bit too long. This works really well with any students, primary, secondary, and adults, but I'm thinking now a bit more about primary students. And then anything else that we can do just to make it different, special. So using when we present something colored or paper or shaped in some way or card or something glittery maybe, although that's not environmentally friendly. So let's think of other options. using different areas of the classroom, of the corridor, for a specific task. We spoke about competition. Sometimes maybe we can leave parts of a sentence or vocabulary words at the end of the corridor, and they just need to grab them and come back to the classroom. Then we'll talk about them together. And that in itself is something really simple, and they just enjoy having to go get them. You don't even need to say it's a race, they will automatically turn it into a race themselves. It's a great brain break as well. And then, of course, I think when we're doing projects about a specific topic that they know nothing about, it's really important to hook them with something. It can be a video. We have loads of resources nowadays on the internet. It can be a story that you know about, that you tell them or that you make up. Maybe a photo you've taken on the way there or from your the area where you live. No, something that can give them a little insight into your life, and maybe an object that you bring, or maybe themselves. Very well recently, yeah, very recently, we had to work on a project, and the starting point was a text about Japan that was not very interesting in itself. So there was a student who wouldn't stop talking about Japan and how she had an uncle who lived there who had married a Japanese woman, and well, she told us all sorts of details about their life there. So I just well, she actually wanted to do a presentation, and I said, well, let's do that on the day that we're gonna read the text about Japan and then do the rest of the project. So she did a presentation. She brought a lot of things that she had bought on her trip there, and then everybody was extremely interested in the text, in finding out more, and in working um, on the topic. Not because Japan in itself wasn't interesting, but just because the text seemed really long, and of course students were actually a bit scared of the task in itself, the beginning of the task anyway. So I think it's very important to be ready to change your plans, right? If there's something that motivates them more, using your students in this way that I just mentioned, or maybe listening to them because they might be proposing a feasible alternative in class to what you were initially thinking. Sometimes we're really focused on covering content, and then we realize that um, we can actually do things slightly different in the way that they're proposing, and it's also valid, right? We're also meeting the learning outcomes. So I think that's an essential task. Listen to them and be flexible and be ready to change what we had prepared if necessary. When talking about accessibility, accessing materials, information, retaining this information, some students might need more help than other ones. So, as I mentioned earlier, of course, if somebody has a visual or an auditory impairment, we need to make sure that there are format alternatives, right? We use a lot of video when we're teaching English because it's a great visual support for students who might have a very low level or low working memory. We need to make sure that if our students have a visual impairment, the video has running commentary, for example, and we need to check this before class. If our students just have an impairment but they're not totally blind, we will have to think about font, color, contrast, size. And of course, with visual and auditory impairments, we will also have to even talk to our students. They'll be the best source of information regarding uh, where is the best area for them to sit. It's probably going to be close to the board, to the teacher, away from noise, facing other students when they're doing speaking tasks, and anything else that they require that they will be very good at telling us about. And going back to those executive functions, we said that the main areas that can be impaired or that they can be a deficit of our working memory, attention, span, no? Or it's not that there is a lack of attention, it's that maybe our students' attention is directed towards something they're more interested in. Time management and planning and organizing. So for this, it's key to make sure that we externalize in the classroom all that important information. And as we said, in project-based learning, there's a lot of information. They're going to have to pull from different areas of knowledge, even from different subjects, no, and use all of that for a specific project. So we need to make sure we externalize that. We'll talk in a minute about how we externalize time, because it's not going to be the same amount of time for every project, every part of it. And mental problem, sorry, there's an A there from my Spanish spell check. Mental problem solving. So projects are going to be long, they're going to be different, and we're going to have to help our students plan and solve those problems and scaffold that, all that planning. So let's make the next part more visual with some examples of how to externalize that important information, or what that information is. So we're talking, of course, about instructions, instructions on the board. But for some students, for example, students on the autism spectrum might have monotropism, which means that they tend to focus on a certain area at a time, while other students might be paying attention to everything around them, a lot of different things that are going on at the same time. So some students might actually benefit from having those instructions right in front of them, which should be, of course, staged, simple, maybe in some cases, and yes, sorry, and on their desk. I think I said that. Right in front of them. We can get them used to ticking them off themselves so that they become autonomous learners. And this gives them a sense of predictability. It helps them know what's coming next, right? And it helps them interact more confidently because they know where they are and they know where they're going. The same applies to the class menu. We should get used to having our board nicely divided into different areas that make sense to us. And one of them should be the class menu or the project steps. We are probably going to be working on a project for several days, so maybe just those steps that we're going to do on a certain day. I'm going to take a sip, sorry. Of course, for some students, we might even be able to use pictograms like those there. There's a link here. I'm not sure whether that link is, yeah, I think maybe Melissa or Joe are going to share it. There's well, there are loads of websites where we can access these pictograms for free, download them, print them, and use them with our students. They're really good with low levels or with students on the autism spectrum to show them what stages we're going to be going through. We're doing product work now, speaking. Now we're doing, okay, each of the stages. Now it's time to write. So using these visuals to support what we've written or just on their own is very useful to help students know what's going on and remember it as well. The same thing happens with success criteria. Of course, our students need to know how to where we're going and how to get there, right? And what we are going to be assessing them on. So sharing this with them at the beginning will also make them feel more confident, no? So that they know what they need to do to get a good grade, of course, and especially to learn. So these can be shared with them um, on the board in a piece of paper. And I think one of the key areas is having essential vocabulary and language that they're going to need right in front of them. I use very much toolkits per topic. So we work for about a month or a month and a half on a big project that's divided into mini projects. So it's always kind of the same vocabulary or related vocabulary, and students work on their own toolkits, which are very big posters that we have on the wall, and that way they get used to checking those posters in every activity that they need to carry out. So whenever they're speaking or writing and they feel the urge to ask me, how do you say this? How do you say that? And other students might not even ask because they are lacking confidence or because they don't even remember that we've already seen that. So it's very useful for them to remember this is here, this resource is here. You can be autonomous, you can check it, and it's always there for you. And once they're the ones making it, there are loads more chances that they will remember it's there and they will feel the motivation to use it. As I said, some students might benefit from having vocabulary right in front of them when it's just for a specific part of the group work, for example. So we can print it out in advance, or we can just scribble it down when we see that the student needs it. In order not to single out, it's better, of course, to do it for the group, right? Not just for one student. And well, sideboards as well, especially when we want them to write. It's nice to have those printed, if they're problematic, printed out in big writing on the wall. There are other things that we will need to externalize, especially in project-based learning, when we are going to be working for a long time on the same project. So visual timers, I don't actually use timers all the time in my classes, just at certain points, right? Because we also want students to be relaxed and to have plenty of thinking time. But sometimes we will need to say, okay, we've got 10 minutes to work on this, and you set a visual timer if you have an interactive whiteboard, or you can just get a sand clock, bring it into the class. And that way students know, because sometimes students with a executive function deficit, they just don't know how much time we're talking about when we tell them a number. And of course, young students with or without this deficit will not know either. So they can get very stressed, right, about not running out of ideas before the time is, or not coming up with ideas before the time runs out. And also, when it comes to time, it's better just to speak about tasks rather than about time. Okay, how long do we have to do this? Well, so you've got enough time to look up the capitals of the countries and put the names on this chart. Okay, and then we'll go to the break or we'll go home. So it's better to talk to students about tasks or to do it through these visuals than about 10 or 15 minutes, something that that means nothing for some of our students. And then, of course, in order to show them as well that we are advancing and to boost their motivation and to help them plan, it's very useful to make little progress trackers that we can just improvise depending on the steps of each of our projects, right? We can even make them with them in the class if we don't have time to prepare them outside the class. It's more or less the same thing with timelines. And then we are going to need to externalize problem solving here, right? Because it's not, as I said, it's not just filling in gaps and going home. They're going to have to use their higher order thinking skills, but some students might have trouble visualizing an outcome. So we can very easily help them think about something, for example, word order with flashcards. Same thing with grammar, putting things in order physically, okay, not just with the sentence on the page, because they have trouble imagining what the result is going to be. So doing it physically with pieces of card, with images, we can help our students visualize what the outcome is going to be and try different alternatives. And of course, when it comes to the project itself, we always need to remember to help them plan with a mind map or with a task planner, right? This is a very good one on the right that is available online the the Endowment Education Foundation have it for free on their webpage. And it even includes the time that they need to work on it for, very visual, the reward. So it's a great example that we can use as it is or adapt to our classes. Okay, and we have reached the last stage. No? We've talked about how to engage them, how to make them want to participate. We've talked about how they can access information at the beginning and while they're working in groups, while they're working on their own. And now we have to think about how they are going to respond, how they're going to communicate their outcomes in a project. So, as we said before, the main thing is, of course, to make sure they know that there's no right or wrong, right? That especially in English language learning, even if we're working on a project around the topic, they might not get all of the information right, but they're speaking in English, so they're working on a lot of different skills at the same time. They're working on soft skills, they're working on presentation, on communication. So there's a lot of things we can praise, right? Thankfully, in this kind of methodology. So I think one of the main things that we have to bear in mind is that there are loads of ways of answering, not just loads of opportunities to practice, as we mentioned before, but loads of ways of answering, showing that we know something depending on the age, but not only. Students can point to show that they know an answer. They can use flashcards, raise them, or objects. They can use those mini whiteboards they love, and it's a very easy way for teachers to know what everybody knows at a glance. They can use total physical response, which is, for example, going to the right if this is true, going to the left is if this is false. And of course, teachers can be very helpful and just tell their students two answers, and then the student knows which one is the right one, and they don't have to worry about the language. They just need to repeat what the teacher has just said. Then there might be a bit more trouble when it comes to open class participation, as we mentioned before, because of those fears, that fear of making mistakes. So there are a lot of little things that we can do to help our students feel more secure. So, for example, we can just rehearse with the student on a one-to-one basis while they're working or they're sharing their answers in peers. We can go and talk to the student, see what their answer is, reassure them, let them know, yes, that's the right answer, well done. And then when we ask them to share later on, they know that what they're sharing is correct. We should always use project or not project peer checking, right? So that's why it's beneficial to use this methodology, because there's a lot of that, so that they can think, they can talk together about it, and then they share once they've rehearsed. They can also just elaborate a little bit on somebody else's comment, or even better, report on what somebody else has said. So that way, once again, there's no fear about getting something wrong, no, just the language really, but they're just reporting what somebody did. So it's not me, it's them. And the same thing applies to role playing. It's very easy to get them to forget that they're scared because they're not themselves, they're pretending to be somebody else. And then questions should be open to get them to share as much as possible, and try to use a lot of might, right? So that it's, what might we think, why might this be this way? So that we transmit that there's no wrong answer. It's just, we're just speculating and trying to get an answer together as a class. Despite this, I think that some students might even struggle during teamwork, right? Which initially might seem an easier part because nobody, like, there's less exposure, right? But some students might find it really difficult to imagine what the final task is going to be, to visualize it. So apart from all of those things that we mentioned, externalizing information, I think a key message would be to make sure that everybody in the group, not in every case, but very often we might need to attribute different functions, right? So you're going to look up the parts of the body and da da da, da, and you're going to write it down. You're going to check the spelling. You're going to start drawing it. Okay, so different roles that can, of course, change as we monitor and we reassign those tasks, and definitely allow plenty of time. Some students might need a lot of time to get going, and then once they do, it's okay. They start getting these ideas, or they need time to understand what the steps are. So I think that wrapping up, and we're almost done now in a minute, what we need to remember about project-based learning is that it's very flexible. So that's great, because that's what we need to make sure that we can cater for all of our students' needs. But we also need to be, as teachers, very structured, right? So some students are going to need that flexibility for motivation, to include their diverse needs of learning or preferences, but then other students are really going to need structure to feel confident, to feel secure, to know what's coming next. And of course, with this structure, we're going to be able to scaffold, right, by providing those visual planners, by providing that vocabulary. It should always be systematic to know that, so that they know that it's always going to be there for them. So I think that's the last tip from my side, that to try and keep flexibility and structure together during our projects. And I think we're not going to have time for, no, we're not going to really have time for the practical example, but I'm sure that people were thinking about, already thinking about how this can apply to their own classrooms, and we can talk about it now for a bit in the Q&A. These are some QR codes with links, but in the handout you've got the same link. You have the whole link if you want to have the whole link to click on it. Okay, so you've got both options. And thank you very much for listening. You can find me on speakersdigest.org. I don't know why that's not there. And on Instagram, that's the Instagram as well. So I write about language learning and of course about inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Elsa. Thanks so much. And yeah, I really encourage everyone to go and look up Speakers Digest. There's lots of really great articles on there. I had a lot of time to look this week, and I enjoyed a lot there. So thank you for all of that. It's a huge topic. I'm sure we could talk for so many webinars about it. I just want to tell everyone that there is a free course at the moment called Inclusive Classrooms on teachingenglish.org.uk. We'll put the link in the chat and in the comments on Facebook, and yeah, we really encourage everyone to check that out. So Elsa, we've got some time for questions. So if you stop sharing your screen, we'll take a look at what we have from our audience.
Yeah, sure. Great.
All right. So, there's a great question from Cessna Francia. And Cessna asks, Elsa, what's the most challenging experience you've encountered in making PBL, project-based learning, more inclusive, and how did you address it?
I think I actually maybe, I'm not sure whether it was the most challenging, but it was the one that I wasn't prepared for. Was a student that was really well behaved. He was late primary, and he just didn't do anything during project work. So it was really difficult for me to figure out what was going on, because he did seem to understand the language, but then he had these communication difficulties that prevented him from interacting in project work. And that even led me to think that he wasn't going to want to do the presentations, and I was wrong, because then he actually was okay with doing in open class presentations. He read them, but he really wanted to do them now. So kind of proving me wrong, no, what my expectations were. And what I realized is that this student needed uh, all of that language help that I spoke about. No? So having the language right in front of him, and he really benefited from from having a task. So during group work, this student really thrived when he was giving a specific task, something very clear, and he really didn't understand, okay, there's the final objective, and we're going to get there in a few days. So for me, that was unusual, and he didn't have a diagnosis or anything. That's as well why it was a bit trickier, no, because I hadn't anticipated it. And I started giving them functions, everybody in the group, of course, not just him, and it worked really well. um, they all felt comfortable with it, and of course then flexibility, no, they didn't always have the same function. But
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really just great practice, definitely, isn't it? Like all of the things that you mentioned about instructions, about showing sight words, it's some things that I've taken from reading about inclusive classrooms and just put into my classroom where I might not have any child with executive function disorder, and it helps, doesn't
exactly.
it? How old was that child that you talked about?
He was 11.
11, okay.
Yeah.
Primary.
And I totally agree with what you just said about inclusive, about like best practices. I think talking about inclusion sometimes it really helps teachers realize that what they're doing, that what they're already doing, is actually very inclusive of a majority of their students, and it's not additional work, right? We're not having to do anything different and put a lot of hours outside our teaching time to prepare different tasks.
I really agree with you. And on that note, we'll have to end there because of time. But thank you so much for coming, talking to us about inclusive PBL classrooms. If you are available, everyone who's watching on Facebook and here in Zoom, we're going to have a 15-minute break, and then we'll be back to talk about understanding and accommodating neurodiversity in ELT with Claire Hartz. We'll have a short break, then we'll be back. Big thanks once again to Elsa O'Brien, our presenter. And
thanks for having
me. No problem at all. And thanks to everyone behind the scenes working here in Zoom, and Teaching English, and on Facebook. We'll see you soon for webinar number 2. Goodbye.